Here's what's been sitting heavy on my chest ever since this whole situation started swirling around Blueface and Nevaeh, and I need y'all to pay real close attention because I don't think we're talking about the right thing. Everybody out here running to their keyboards asking who dialed the police on Blueface, who put in that call to CPS about Nevaeh, who's staying in whose house, and whether Blueface and Nevaeh are still under the same roof pretending everything's peaches. Meanwhile, I'm sitting over here shaking my head because we are stepping right over the loudest part of this entire mess. And I'ma tell you exactly what it is. It's not the police. It's not the CPS report. It's not even whether Blueface still wants to keep this woman around after all these embarrassments. The part that's been keeping me up is the child. A little boy. A conversation that never should have happened in front of a camera, and a response from a grown man that I still can't shake off. Because if what we saw circulating is accurate, Blueface reportedly noticed that Nevaeh's son wasn't giving him the same warmth he used to give. Whether the boy had been gone a couple of days, a weekend, whatever it was, Blueface picked up on the shift and started asking questions. And the little boy, superior, in his own words, said something that stopped my whole scroll. He said his mama told him not to hug Blueface. Told him not to ask Blueface to pick him up. Told him not to sit in Blueface's lap. 3 separate boundaries. Delivered by a little boy who probably didn't even realize the weight of what he was saying. And I need us to sit with that for a second because I have questions. A lot of questions. And every single one of them lands squarely on the grown people in that room. Now, before somebody sprints into my comments section trying to say I'm accusing Blueface of something specific, let me be very clear right now. I am not accusing Blueface of a crime. I'm not saying I know what does or doesn't happen inside that house. I don't live there. I'm not a witness. I'm not the police. I'm not a court. I'm not the judge. But I am a grown woman with eyes, and I have raised children, and I know what boundaries sound like when they're set by a mother who saw something, felt something, or suspected something. And when a child repeats those boundaries out loud to the very person the boundary was drawn against, everybody with any sense in the room should have paused. Everybody. And the fact that the pause never came is exactly why I'm sitting here recording today. Because think about it. Really think about it. When a child looks up and says, "My mommy told me not to do that," the correct adult response is not to keep pressing that same child for more details. The correct response, especially if you a grown man, is to look directly at that child's mother, who is right there in the room, and ask her what she meant. Ask her why she said that. Ask her what she saw or heard or noticed that made her draw a line so specific. Because those boundaries did not fall out of the sky. Nobody wakes up one morning and randomly decides to tell their kid, "Hey, don't sit in that man's lap anymore." That doesn't just happen. That comes from somewhere. Something triggered that. And that something is what we should all be asking about instead of arguing over who dialed 911. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I actually don't have the strongest feelings about Blueface as a person. I think Blueface handles his relationships like a wrecking ball. I think Blueface is messy, immature, and has zero interest in growing up. But I will give him this. When it comes to the women in his life, Blueface is painfully honest. Painfully. He doesn't pretend. He tells them straight up what he's doing, who he's doing it with, and how little he plans to change. So no, I'm not standing here painting Blueface as some kind of monster. That's not what this is. What I'm saying is that in this one interaction, on camera, Blueface's response to a child's boundary was strange. It was unusual. It didn't sit right. And it's the kind of moment where a real man, a mature man, would have redirected the conversation upward, toward the adult in charge, instead of downward, deeper into the child. Because let's not forget who was in that room. Nevaeh was right there. The mother. The person who allegedly set the boundary. She was not in another state. She was not asleep. She was not incapacitated. She was sitting right there while her son laid out 3 separate rules she had given him, and she didn't say a word. Not one. And I'ma keep it real with y'all. That silence is louder than anything anybody has said in this entire scandal. Because if I told my child not to do something, and another adult in my house started digging into that child asking questions about the rule I set, I would shut it down before the second sentence left their mouth. I would say, hey, don't ask him. Ask me. If you got something to say about a rule in this house, come to me like a grown-up. That is what a mother does. That is what any parent with a functioning spine does. And Nevaeh did none of that. Anyway, back to what matters. Before I go any deeper, let me stop for a second and say thank you to every single one of y'all who keeps showing up, watching, sharing, subscribing, and dropping your thoughts in the comments. I don't take a single one of you for granted, and I mean that. This channel wouldn't move the way it moves without you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, let me get back to it, because we are just getting started, and there's a whole lot more that needs to be unpacked here. Because here's the part that's really got me sideways. When we look past the drama, past the police call, past the CPS visit, past the internet screaming at each other about who did what to whom, there is one micro moment in this whole story that changes the entire picture. And that moment is a child, in front of cameras, telling a grown man exactly what his mother said behind that man's back. That is not a small thing. That is not a footnote. That is a giant flashing warning light that the internet is somehow choosing to ignore because everybody is too busy pointing at the CPS phone call. Let me tell y'all something. Forget the CPS call for a second. Forget who dialed it. Forget whether it was a fan, an enemy, a neighbor, or somebody sitting inside that house. The CPS call is downstream of something. Something happened before that call. Something made somebody feel like a call needed to be made. And I have a strong feeling that whatever it was, that little boy already lived it. So let's slow it all the way down. Let's rebuild the scene together, piece by piece, because I want you to see it the way I saw it, moment by moment, breath by breath, so nothing gets lost in translation. Blueface says he noticed the boy was acting differently. I have to be honest, I didn't personally catch that in the clips I watched. If you caught it, let me hear your take below because I want to see what you saw. So Blueface says he noticed. Blueface then starts asking Superior why. And instead of just deflecting or getting shy the way little kids do, Superior tells him what his mother said. 3 specific rules. That's not a random comment. That's not a kid making something up on the fly. That is a child repeating instructions that were burned into him recently enough that he could recite them back word for word. And any parent knows that when your kid can repeat a rule that clean, you told them that rule with intention. You told them that rule more than once. You told them that rule because you needed them to remember it. And Blueface's reaction to hearing those instructions from a small child, in real time, on camera, was not to look at Nevaeh. It was not to ask her what happened. It was not to send the child out of the room so the grown-ups could have a real conversation. His reaction was to keep going. To keep asking. To keep pulling more out of the child in front of the camera. And that is where I had to press pause on the video and rewind it, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was as if the adult in the situation forgot he was the adult. It was as if the boundary itself was less interesting to Blueface than the fact that the child was speaking it out loud. And that right there is what I need us all to focus on. Because let me tell y'all something about growing up in a black household, and I know a lot of y'all who watch me know exactly what I'm about to say. There were certain things we did not do as children. We did not sit in grown men's laps. Especially men who were not our fathers. Especially not for extended periods. That was the rule. Auntie said it. Grandma said it. Mama said it. And even the men in the family reinforced it. And it wasn't because everybody was walking around assuming the worst about everybody else. It was because in our community, we understood that protecting our babies meant putting boundaries in place before the danger ever showed up. Prevention. Not reaction. Prevention. And what Nevaeh did, on paper, sounds like a mother trying to install prevention. But the way she went about it, and more importantly, the way she failed to defend that boundary when it got tested, tells a much messier story. Now, I want to be fair. Sometimes I do hear things a little bit off. Sometimes I do misinterpret. If I'm getting any of this wrong, please, don't hold back. Let me hear your take below, because I read every single comment. I don't block people. I don't delete opinions I disagree with. This whole channel is a conversation. So if you saw something different from what I saw, I want to know. But from where I'm sitting, the picture is starting to become uncomfortably clear. Because when you strip away the noise, what you're left with is a house where an adult woman set a hard boundary between her child and her partner, then failed to enforce it when it was challenged, then let the child do the enforcing on her behalf, and then said absolutely nothing when the challenge came directly. And any woman who has ever been in a difficult relationship knows exactly what that pattern looks like. It looks like fear. It looks like leverage. It looks like a woman who knows something is off but doesn't have the standing, the courage, or the exit plan to say it out loud. And that is what makes this whole situation so heartbreaking, because the person paying the price for that silence is a child who did not ask to be in that house. Let me paint the picture for y'all a different way, because I think the metaphor helps. Imagine the whole situation is a courtroom. Blueface is the one asking questions. Superior, the little boy, is the one on the stand answering them. Nevaeh, the mother, is the witness who has all the information. And the audience, which is us on the internet, is the jury. Now, in any real courtroom, the witness with the actual knowledge is supposed to step in when the child on the stand is being pressed. But in this one, the witness sat there silent while the child took every question. And when the child said, "My mother told me not to," the questioner didn't turn to the witness. Blueface kept working on the child. That is not a normal exchange. That is not what grown-ups do. And if we're the jury, we are watching all of this in real time, and we should be uncomfortable. Now, some of y'all in the comments are gonna say I'm reading too much into a short clip. And you might be right. I own that. But even if I'm reading too much into it, the fact remains, this conversation should never have happened in front of a camera in the first place. If Blueface really wanted to know why Superior was being distant, that was a private conversation to have with Nevaeh, off-screen, with the child playing in another room. The fact that Blueface chose to have it live, on the record, in front of a rolling camera, tells me one of two things. Either he didn't realize how bad it looked, or he didn't care how bad it looked. And I honestly don't know which one is worse. Because if Blueface didn't realize, that means his instincts around this child are so off that he can't even recognize the moment when a boundary is being set for a serious reason. And if he didn't care, then that says something even louder. It says the boundary itself didn't feel real to him. It says the mother's rule didn't carry weight. It says Blueface genuinely believed he could override what she told her own child, and continue doing what he wanted to do regardless. And that, right there, is where my stomach dropped. Because Blueface's actual answer to Superior, in the clip, was essentially that whether or not he and Nevaeh work out, he's still going to pick him up. Still going to do what he's doing. Still going to override what the mother said. And Nevaeh, again, sat there and said nothing. Not one word. Now let me hear your take below. Because I keep asking myself, what kind of woman lets a man overrule the boundary she just set for her own child? What kind of woman lets that boundary get exposed on camera and then doesn't defend it? What kind of woman lets her partner tell her son that he will keep doing the exact thing she told him not to do? That's not survival. That's not being scared. That's something else. And I don't know what to call it, but I know it doesn't look like protection. It looks like priorities that are pointed in the wrong direction. And a mother's priorities, when a child is in the room, are supposed to be the easiest thing in the world to name. Because let's talk about Nevaeh for a minute. Nevaeh has been on the internet loud. She's been on live. She's been on stream. She's been running her mouth about every single subject under the sun. Who Blueface slept with. Who Blueface stayed the night with. Who Blueface hung out with. Who called her crazy. Who called her a groupie. Who tried to slide in her DMs. She has an opinion on all of it. She has energy for all of it. She has volume for all of it. But when her own child says his mother told him not to sit in her boyfriend's lap, suddenly Nevaeh has no voice at all. Suddenly the woman who fights every stranger on Instagram has nothing to say when the moment actually matters. That silence is not accidental. That silence is chosen. That silence is engineered. That silence is telling on itself. And here's where it gets even more interesting, because I want to bring up something that I don't think has been discussed enough. There is a double standard in this house that nobody wants to name. Blueface has a biological daughter. A little girl. His own child. And we have not seen him love bomb that little girl the way he love bombed Superior. Think about that for a second. That is not a normal pattern. Blueface's own daughter, his own flesh and blood, does not get carried around, kissed on, held close, and hip-glued the way Nevaeh's son does. Why is that? Why is the child who is not as getting the physical affection that his own daughter is not receiving? That is a question worth sitting with. That is a question worth asking out loud. And that is a question that, when combined with the boundaries Nevaeh set, starts to paint a picture that a lot of us don't want to look at directly. Now, some of y'all are gonna say, well, maybe Blueface is just closer to Superior because he lives with him. Maybe he doesn't see his daughter as often. And that's a fair point. That is genuinely a fair point. But even accounting for proximity, the difference in physical affection between how Blueface treats his own daughter and how he treats another woman's son is impossible to ignore once you notice it. And once Nevaeh noticed it, apparently, she drew a line. 3 lines, actually. Don't hug. Don't ask to be picked up. Don't sit in his lap. 3 very specific, very physical, very targeted rules. And she gave those rules to a child who was too young to fully understand what he was being protected from. But old enough to repeat them out loud when he was pressed. That is the exact profile of a boundary set out of concern, not out of pettiness. Truth shows up. Truth don't ask permission. Truth don't need an invitation. Truth walks in through the front door whether we're ready for it or not. And every single time we try to argue about who called CPS or who ran to the police, we are dancing around the truth that is already standing right in the middle of the living room. That truth is that a mother felt she needed to install specific physical boundaries between her son and her live-in partner. That truth is that when those boundaries were tested on camera, she did not defend them. That truth is that when her partner announced he would ignore those boundaries, she did not object. And that truth is that the entire internet is choosing to look at every possible detail except that one. Anyway, let me say this again for the people in the back. I am not making accusations. I am asking questions. I am doing exactly what any concerned adult would do when they see a pattern like this unfold in public. I am pausing. I am rewinding. I am asking, hey, does this look right to you? And I am inviting everyone else in the conversation to do the same. Because if we, as an audience, don't ask these questions, then who does? Who is left to raise the alarm for that little boy? His mother didn't. His mother's partner won't. His mother's followers won't, because they're too busy defending her. So somebody has to. And I would rather be the person accused of overthinking than the person who saw the warning signs and stayed quiet because it was uncomfortable. And here's another piece of this that a lot of y'all are missing. Some reports have suggested that the CPS call came from inside the house. From inside. If that's true, and I'm saying if, then somebody in that house saw something serious enough to pick up a phone and call in an official investigation. That's not a fan being petty. That's not a hater making noise. That's not Blueface's other exes stirring the pot for content. That is somebody inside those walls who saw enough to call the state on their own household. Let that marinate for a second. Because whatever they saw, they didn't feel like they could resolve it internally. They didn't feel like Nevaeh was going to protect the child. They didn't feel like Blueface was going to change what he was doing. So they went outside the house to bring in an authority, and that decision, that call, that phone number dialed, was not something they picked up on a whim. That is a serious step. That is not something people do lightly. That is not something anyone does for clout. And it did not happen in a vacuum. Which brings me back around to the mother. Nevaeh. Because at some point, we have to stop letting her hide behind the label of victim. Yes, Nevaeh is in a difficult relationship. Yes, she may not have anywhere else to go. Yes, she may be financially and emotionally entangled in a situation she can't easily walk away from. All of that can be true. But none of that erases her responsibility as a mother. None of that. Because when it comes to your own child, there are certain things you do not compromise on. And letting a man override the physical boundary you set for your own son is one of them. That's the line. That's the one you don't cross no matter how bad the rest of your life is going. That's the one that separates the mothers who mean it from the mothers who just say it. Because there is help out there. There are resources. There are shelters. There are programs. There are family members. There are church folks. There are entire nonprofits set up specifically to help mothers in difficult situations get out and stand on their own feet. If Nevaeh truly does not have anywhere to go, then the internet is full of people who would help her find a landing spot for her and that child tomorrow. All she has to do is reach. But reaching requires humility. Reaching requires admitting the situation isn't working. Reaching requires setting down the identity of being Blueface's girlfriend and picking up the identity of being Superior's mother. And so far, everything Nevaeh has said and done publicly suggests she is not ready to make that switch. And that hesitation, that unwillingness, is exactly what makes a lot of us watching her feel more concerned, not less. Now, some of y'all are gonna push back on me for this next part. You're gonna say, well, she loves him. Nevaeh is in love. She thinks Blueface is going to change. She thinks their relationship is different from the ones he had with the other women. And I hear that. I do. But love is not what's on the table here. What's on the table is a child. And when a child enters the equation, love becomes a secondary consideration. Full stop. Your love life does not get to overrule your child's safety. Your relationship does not get to overrule your kid's boundaries. Your feelings do not get to overrule your baby's well-being. Any parent worth the title knows this. And Nevaeh, in this moment at least, is not acting like a parent worth the title. And I say that not to be cruel to her, but because somebody has to say the words that her friends and family in comments section are apparently too afraid to say. Let me also say this, because I think it's important. Blueface is not the only person in this story who deserves scrutiny. Blueface might be the loudest. He might be the messiest. He might be the one everybody loves to argue about. But the person with the actual power to protect Superior is his mother. Not his mother's boyfriend. Not the audience. Not CPS. His mother. And every single day that she chooses to prioritize the relationship over the child is another day that little boy is left carrying an adult conversation on his own shoulders. That is not fair. That is not right. And it should not be sustainable, because we as a community should not be letting this slide. Not on our watch. Not while the cameras are running. Not while we are literally watching this happen live. Let me hear your take below on this next part. Because I've been thinking about the double standard again, and it's really bothering me. Why is a grown man showing more physical affection to another woman's child than to his own biological daughter? What does that mean? What does that suggest about where Blueface's focus is? What does that tell us about the household dynamic? Because I've raised kids. I've been around kids. I've watched fathers with their daughters. And I can tell you, there is no proximity excuse that fully explains a father who doesn't shower his own little girl with the same affection he showers on someone else's son. That is a red flag. That is a bright red flag. And when it gets combined with a mother who sets targeted physical boundaries and then fails to defend them, that red flag turns into something even more concerning. And I keep going back to what Superior said. I keep replaying it in my head over and over again, day after day, and it will not leave me alone. This little boy told a grown man, on camera, that his mother told him not to sit in his lap. And nobody in that room reacted like it was a big deal. Nobody paused. Nobody said, "Hold on, wait, let's stop the cameras." Nobody sent the child out. Nobody pulled the mother aside. Nobody. They just kept it moving. As if it was a normal Tuesday. As if this little boy hadn't just delivered the most important sentence in that entire household's future. And that, more than anything, tells me that this dysfunction is baked into the daily rhythm of that house. It's not an accident. It's not a slip. It's how they live. And that is terrifying. Because dysfunction becomes normal fast when you don't interrupt it. When a child sees adults ignoring boundaries every single day, that child learns that boundaries don't matter. When a child sees his own mother refusing to speak up, that child learns his voice isn't going to be backed up. When a child gets pressed for information about the very rules that were designed to protect him, that child learns that even the rules can be pulled apart with the right questions. And once a child learns those lessons, they carry them for life. They carry them into their next relationships. They carry them into their friendships. They carry them into their parenting. This is not just about one moment on one live stream. This is about the shape of a childhood. This is about the internal script Superior is writing right now about what love looks like, what safety looks like, and whether the adults around him will show up when it counts. Anyway, back to what matters. The internet needs to redirect its attention. Stop arguing about who dialed CPS. Stop arguing about who called the police. Stop arguing about whether Blueface and Nevaeh are still together. Start asking why a mother felt the need to set 3 specific physical boundaries between her son and her boyfriend. Start asking why she didn't defend those boundaries when they were challenged. Start asking why a grown man's response was to promise he would ignore them anyway. Start asking why his own biological daughter isn't getting the same physical affection. Start asking why somebody inside that house felt compelled to call the state. All of those questions matter. All of them. And every single one of them has been drowned out by the noise of who called who. Now let me pull on another thread that I don't think has gotten enough airtime. Nevaeh has said, on stream, more than once, that Blueface has never put his hands on her, has never put his hands on any woman. Those were her words. She said them out loud. She said them with confidence. And yet, we have seen with our own eyes the receipts that contradict every single one of those statements. We have seen the holes in the wall. We have seen the aftermath. We have heard Blueface himself, in his own casual way, talk about physical altercations that took place inside that house. So when Nevaeh tells us that everything is fine, that everything is safe, that everything is under control, we have every reason to receive that claim with our whole eyebrow raised. Because a woman who will lie about physical altercations to protect the image of her relationship is a woman who might also lie about other things happening in that house. That's not me being cynical. That's me being observant. And now let me ask you something else. If Nevaeh was willing to publicly deny things that we have all seen with our own eyes, what else is she willing to deny? What else is she willing to minimize? What else is she willing to hide behind a smile and a stream? Because once a person has demonstrated to you that they will lie about the small stuff to keep their situation intact, you cannot rely on them to tell you the truth about the big stuff. That is just basic human logic. That is how trust works. That is how credibility works. And Nevaeh has spent the last several months burning through her own credibility one live stream at a time. Let me pivot here for a second, because I want to talk about the way this whole situation started. Nevaeh did not just fall into Blueface's life. She pursued it. She positioned herself. She made moves. She has openly talked about wanting to be with him. She has openly talked about the lengths she went through to get closer. And I'm not gonna sit here and act like every woman who ends up in a chaotic relationship signed up for what came next. That's not fair. But Nevaeh has been very clear that she wanted this. She campaigned for this. She sacrificed things to get this. And now that the reality of it is showing up in her son's mouth, on camera, she's silent. And that silence, in the context of everything she did to get into that house, hits different. It really does. Because if you plotted, planned, schemed, and pushed your way into a household with a man like Blueface, and everybody watching knows that you did exactly that, then you owe your child a much higher standard of protection, not a lower one. You knew what you were walking into. You knew his history. You knew the kind of chaos he generates. You knew the kind of camera he keeps rolling. And if you still decided that was the environment worth bringing your son into, then the burden is on you, twice as heavy, to make sure that son is protected every single second of every single day. That is the deal. That is the contract. That is the price of the choice. And Nevaeh, so far, is not paying it. Now, I'm gonna wrap this up, because I've said what I needed to say. But before I do, let me say this one last thing. Not because I'm claiming to know everything. Not because I'm claiming to have seen inside that house. Not because I'm making a formal accusation of any kind. But because I have eyes, and I have ears, and I have a heart that still cares about little kids in situations they didn't choose. What we watched leading up to CPS being called at Blueface's house was not normal. It was not healthy. It was not a stable household making stable decisions. It was a mother allowing her partner to overrule her rules in front of her child. It was a partner announcing on camera that he would keep doing what she told her son not to let him do. It was a child left to negotiate an adult boundary he never should have been asked to hold. And it was an entire online audience watching it happen in real time and choosing to argue about the wrong details. So here is what I'll leave y'all with. If you are a mother watching this, please, protect your babies. Please. I don't care how much you love the man. I don't care how much you've invested in the relationship. I don't care how much your life has become entangled with his. When your child tells you something feels off, believe them. When you feel like you need to install a physical boundary between your child and another adult, enforce it. When somebody challenges that boundary in front of your child, defend it out loud. Do not sit in silence while your child gets pressed for information about the rules you set. That silence is a message. And it's the wrong message. Your child is watching every single second of how you respond, and they will remember it forever. Long after the man is gone, long after the house is gone, long after the cameras are off, long after the streams are gone, long after the internet has moved on to the next scandal, that memory will remain. Make sure it's a memory of you standing up, not sitting down. And if you know a mother in a situation like this, please, be the friend who says the hard thing. Be the auntie, be the cousin, be the neighbor who pulls her aside and says, hey, this doesn't look right. Because sometimes women in these situations don't hear themselves anymore. Sometimes they need somebody outside the fog to name what's happening. Sometimes that outside voice is the difference between another year of dysfunction and a real exit plan. Be that voice. Even if she gets mad. Even if she blocks you. Even if she calls you a hater. Be that voice. Because the child cannot advocate for himself, and the mother in the fog cannot see clearly, and the partner has no incentive to change anything. Somebody has to break the pattern. And it might have to be you. And if it is you, know that the discomfort of the conversation is nothing compared to the peace of mind of knowing you tried. Also, if you're a man watching this, and you found yourself in a household with a partner's child, take this as a lesson. When that child's mother sets a boundary between you and her kid, respect it. Don't question it. Don't press it. Don't announce you'll ignore it. Respect it. Because those boundaries are not personal attacks on you. They are protection installed by a mother doing her job. And every time you accept a boundary without a fight, you demonstrate that you are trustworthy. And every time you challenge one on camera, you tell everybody watching exactly who you are. Blueface should have known that. Blueface should have modeled that. Blueface, of all the grown men in that room, should have been the one to step up and say, "Hey, if that's the boundary, no explanation needed." And instead, he did the opposite. And that opposite is what we're all still processing. Let me hear your take below on all of this, because I know a lot of y'all have thoughts. Tell me if you saw the same things I saw. Tell me if you saw something different. Tell me if you think I'm way off. I want the whole conversation, not just the parts that agree with me. Because at the end of the day, none of us really know what's happening behind those closed doors. All we have are the clips, the streams, the reports, and our own judgment. And judgment gets sharper when it's shared. So share yours. Drop the essay. Drop the one-liner. Drop the emoji. Whatever. Just say something, because these are the conversations that keep our community sharp. These are the conversations that make sure the next superior in the next house has a better chance of somebody noticing. And listen, we'll have more to talk about soon. This story is not close to over. There are more pieces coming. There are more streams coming. There are more updates coming. And I will be right here, sifting through every one of them so we can figure out what's real, what's performance, and what needs to be taken seriously. Because that's what we do here. We don't just watch the show. We read between the lines. We ask the questions the rest of the internet is too busy to ask. And we protect the ones who can't protect themselves. That is the mission. That has always been the mission. That will always be the mission, no matter how many people don't like the questions I ask. And as long as y'all keep showing up, showing out, and speaking up for what is right, I'll keep doing the work. So until the next one, keep your eyes wide open, keep your instincts sharp, keep your babies close, and if you see something that doesn't sit right, don't be afraid to say it out loud. Silence is what keeps bad situations going. Voices are what break them. Be a voice. Especially for the little ones. Because the little ones are watching. The little ones are listening. The little ones are learning. And what we do, or don't do, in these moments, becomes the world they grow up in. So let's build a world worth growing up in. Let's protect Superior. Let's protect every Superior in every house on every block. That's the T, y'all. Protect your peace, protect your people, protect your little ones, and never forget that the loudest voices online are not always the ones telling the truth. Sometimes the quietest child in the room is the one holding the biggest story. Listen for that voice. Advocate for that voice. And when you hear a boundary getting broken, don't just scroll past it, don't just laugh it off, don't just wait for somebody else to say something. Say something yourself. Because that is how we change things. That is how we keep the next superior from carrying a story like this alone. Take care of you.